Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza, and today we are going to speak with a psychoanalyst. She's actually been a professional psychoanalyst for over 30 years. She has authored numerous articles, books on parenting, developmental psychology, clinical treatment, contemporary research. She has one of her books is Busy Parents' Guide to Managing Anxiety, Busy Parents' Guide to Managing Anger. In addition to what we're going to talk about today, we are going to talk about narcissism. And with her book, Are You Living with a Narcissist? How Narcissistic Men Impact Your Happiness, How to Identify Them, and How to Avoid Raising One. I'm sure this is going to be enlightening for not only myself, but for everyone listening to this, and share this with your friends, family that may benefit from this podcast. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Laurie Hollman to the podcast. Welcome, Dr. Laurie.
Hi. Welcome to everybody who's listening.
Yes. I'm glad that you're able to make the podcast. And what we're talking about today, it seems like I'd like for you to clear the air, because it seems like narcissism is on the rise. Are we mislabeling people, especially on social media? It seems like, oh, that person's offhanded comment. You would say that person's a narcissist. But how do we determine, what's a narcissist versus somebody that's overly self-confident?
Yeah, that's a really good way to start. There are what I consider about 16 or 17 characteristics that I can tell you about with some examples, but no one person must have all these characteristics. It's more like they have 5 or 6, and some have many more. Narcissism in itself is a spectrum from normal narcissism, which is to love oneself, to have good self-esteem, to pathological views of oneself that focus on self-importance. And so there's what I call a developmental line. Little kids are narcissistic. A 3-year-old likes to dance in front of daddy. That's perfectly normal, and he should give her a great audience. That's wonderful. But if that need for admiration persists throughout life and into adulthood, when one has ambitions and relationships, then we get into trouble. But now the majority of people with the actual narcissistic personality disorder, often referred to as NPD, are men. They are considered 50 to 75% of those who fulfill the criteria. So I'll be talking about men, but it doesn't mean that women can't also have NPD. So let me tell you about some of the main characteristics of the successful narcissistic man, because often, in my experience, in my clinical experience, these men are very successful and are very ambitious and are very accomplished. So when they seek admiration, it looks like it makes sense. It's just that it's excessive. So the outward success sometimes hides that deep inside they feel inferior, interestingly enough. So they may come to therapy or seem to be suffering from depression because people in relationships with them threaten to leave them over years. After a while, they catch on. The word narcissism comes from a Greek myth about Narcissus that people may have heard of. It's a man who sees his own reflection in a pool of water and falls in love with it. And one man in particular that I can think of said to me anytime I was talking about other people in his life, no, we're talking about me. And he really meant it and didn't see it as an odd thing to say. But, of course, it helped clarify things for myself. They exaggerate their self-importance, their attractiveness, which may not be physical but socially, academically, professionally, and they think their personality is just the most charming person you've ever met. So one characteristic is they do talk about themselves almost exclusively. They tend to speak and think about themselves most of the time. They're conscious of how they look, their wealth, if they have it, which often they do. Talents, achievements are often many, and they expect to hold your attention to these attributes as they speak rather than think about yourself. But at times these comments are exaggerated or at least overemphasized and not necessarily accurate reflections of their whole lives. So even when they are based on reality, they're repeated endlessly. And those in their close environment hear the same stories over and over every time they meet someone new. We'll say a wife, they meet a new couple, and the man jumps into his experiences, and he's very entertaining. So people enjoy listening and don't seek to have a focus turned on themselves. They're kind of at a party, and they enjoy hearing this very charming person who is centered on themselves but lacks empathy. They're unable to recognize or understand the needs and feelings of other people, but they don't see themselves that way. A second characteristic is that they have fantasies of greatness. So you may be very smart, very accomplished, but it doesn't make you greater than other people. It just makes you have those gifts. But the minds of those with MPD tend to be filled with elaborate fantasies about success, power, brilliance, beauty of the perfect mate, and they do believe sincerely that they should have the best of everything. And that may include houses, cars, clothes, medical care, where they attend school. But the ironic thing, and this is why I actually have compassion for narcissists, is that these attempts are attempts to fend off inner emptiness and a sense of shame instead of the outward specialness and sense of control that they reveal. They often don't know it because they're so constantly busy to keep themselves from knowing it. I can think of a guy who is a neurosurgeon, and he really is a remarkable doctor. He's in my book. I call him Wade. It's actually, he has another profession, but I give him this profession in the book, which is comparable to his own. And this is a very super knowledgeable man. I mean, he sits on the computer at night for hours learning everything about everything. So when he goes out, and he has a great memory, so when he goes out socially, any topic that comes up, he becomes the expert. And, of course, people admire that and want to hear all the details. And his wife listens to him drone on, kicks him under the table, because she knows that in time, if he keeps this up, people are really just being polite. They don't want to hear the same stories 100 times. But he doesn't know that. He seriously doesn't know it. He'd be surprised to hear that idea and think that you're just way off base. But they kind of lack an inner core, and I've heard younger narcissists, like 20-year-olds, who are much more flexible, actually say, I don't have an inner core. A kid actually said that to me. He said, I don't know who I am. Yeah, because he was so busy building this persona that he never actually got to know himself. You know, I'm diverting a little, but he had narcissistic parents who viewed him as a child prodigy, which he was. Really brilliant little boy. As a teenager, he was fluent in Chinese as well as in regular English. You know, at a very young age, he was reading constantly. And this made his parents feel like they were really important too. So instead of like sort of stemming the tide and let him think of others, he never learned to share. He was terrible in preschool. He was a real temper tantrum kid. And he grew up without containing this sense of powerfulness. So they come to believe that they are superior. and often have this grandiose sense of self-importance. If you're in tune to it, you kind of can see it. There's like an air of self-importance that leads them to feel superior to others, and they want to be in the company of people they consider great. They believe that only others who are just as special as they perceive they are should be in their company. They maintain feelings of superiority by often disparaging others, focusing very quickly on others' flaws, real or imagined, but often they're their own flaws that are hidden deep inside. And that's why they're so capable of picking them up in other people. So they hide their own shortcomings and preserve this grand self-image. Interrupt anytime.
No, sure. It's a good stream of consciousness because, I mean, what you're identifying, it seems like, I mean, obviously it's a diagnosis, but there seems to be a pervading belief that on some level, at least in the business world, that you have to have some level of this to outwit your competitors and to be the top of the food chain.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are a winner, and the world is divided into winners and losers, and nothing's in between. So in order to keep up that belief about themselves, they require constant praise. In my book, I talk about a young woman named Laura who must continuously praise her lawyer husband's accomplishments. And he's a personal injury lawyer in the book, and his accomplishments are fantastic. This is a man who, in real life, made $6 million on one case and was written up about it. So, it's kind of hard to have that kind of success and not have it affect you. But this outward confidence that results can often hide the vulnerability and fragile self-esteem. Remarkably, even if you make that money, you don't know you're going to make it again. And that it leads to self-doubt. So they continually prop themselves up and expect and need constant attention, praise, and admiration. They do expect to be recognized as superior even when their achievements don't warrant it. I mean, these people aren't always brilliant in every respect, but they, of course, focus everybody on what they are brilliant in. Another characteristic is they experience a sense of entitlement that they are certain they deserve. The boy I was talking about before, the child prodigy, had a very large family, and each time a sibling was born, he took it almost as a personal insult that his mother couldn't attend to him as fully as the siblings. And he was always angry at her. They were in a constant battle, and he sought to compensate by having status, wealthy friends, which he couldn't achieve very well because people didn't like him, and he knew it. And that was really tough. I mean, I felt for him because it's like a person walking blind. They don't know what they're doing wrong because they feel this so completely, expecting others will offer them special favors and fulfill their requests immediately without question. And if they aren't treated that way, they become very irritable and impatient and angry. Some of these men are very passive-aggressive in that they give silent treatment when they don't feel what they regard as what they should have as their own. I've seen these men not talk to their wives for days. I mean, really silent. They have what they call their own room, and they go in it, and they just don't speak for days until maybe something wanes, and they get back into the fold. So as children, they were often very demanding, temper tantrums, and needed insatiable attention. A sad characteristic is they do take advantage of other people. So they direct others in their lives, especially in intimate relationships, to always have regard for their interests and their activities. They do not like to be idle. To be idle is to feel something inside. So they're really busy, and they're on the move. and they've seen people who can afford it see every concert, every show, every form of entertainment you can imagine, and they expect their wives and even their children to come with them. And everybody isn't always interested. You know, a 7-year-old doesn't want to go to a concert. But they don't get it. That's the blind spot that I guess I want to emphasize. Now, they often do have long-term relationships because I'll talk about the women later or their spouses later, and they may be disloyal to their spouses and friends, and they may lie and they may cheat. And this is a big question mark, whether they have remorse. In treatment over time, like the young boy I talked about, the 20-something-year-old, he definitely did have remorse for the way he treated his siblings. Once he was older and he looked at the effect on them, he was sorry. But that took a lot of years of treatment. A man who cheats on his wife and has a secret affair that she really doesn't know anything about, maybe for 20 years, suddenly finds out through some quirk of somebody else telling her, and she's shocked. And it's a very despairing feeling because you feel like, who have I been married to all these years? But the question is, once it's known and out in the open, can they have remorse? Can they feel badly for the person they have so horribly hurt? Some can, some can't. And this is where we get into the fine line of the difference between a narcissist and what other people call a sociopath or a psychopath, which is not my expertise, but I do know the difference. I would not see a psychopath because that could be a violent person, and that would legitimately scare me.
Right.
And I'm not trained in that. But a narcissist, I don't fear. It's not, the person isn't violent. The person just has disregard for others, and they're very envious of others. That's another common characteristic. Because of their low self-esteem and need to be superior, they see people who have things they don't, including tangible items, that give them status or admiration, as threats to their well-being. They want what they want, and they want it when they want it, and will seek vengeance in some way towards other people who don't come into their favor, so to speak. They relish, obviously, being the center of attention. This is what they need. And they need constant praise from others. It's like food to them. It feeds their self-esteem and makes them, and I should say, strengthens their sense of superiority to others. So they crave that attention and seek it out very effectively in a charming way. They're wonderful conversationalists. They feel very prone to talk about themselves. They may exaggerate their knowledge and accomplishments, and lots of people do that socially, but they believe what they're saying. They don't say, oh, I'm just kind of kidding. I didn't quite do that. They would never say that. They crave attention. They're outspoken. There's an arrogance that sometimes draws people to them, actually. But they do live in, if you want to feel for them, imagine living in a world where you fear not always being admired and accepted. That keeps you on guard. You constantly search for this, for fear that you'll fall apart without it. They lack empathy. That's a critical characteristic. They're unable to empathize with others and understand other people's perspectives, to comprehend that others may have struggles of their own. They seem to have an inability to recognize the needs and feelings of others. Yet they have, they're smart. They know the script that sounds empathic. Often the physicians are very comforting to their patients who adore them. They know what to say and when to say it. The question is, do they feel it? And somebody who is in dire straits is going to believe this person who encourages them. So, because they need to. So they're not, caught it's not apparent that this is sort of a script. Sometimes, when marital relations are brought to me, I do have to, for a true person with NPD who will not empathize with his partner, I almost do have to give him a script to make the other person feel better. Tell them.
Wow.
Yeah, in other words, when you're listening to, I'll say man and wife, when you're listening to your wife, paraphrase what she just said in her words so she knows you understand. Now, a caring person does that because he wants the person to know they understand. But this man will do it because he knows it's effective. And it's very hard to tell the difference until it can be years and years of a relationship. They also have boundless ambitions, much of which they fulfill. They fantasize about not only doing their best, but being the best. And this is important for parents who always say, thinking they're helping their child, just do your best. Don't worry. Just try. Do your best. The narcissistic person hears that as be the best or you fail. So they often, if they fall short, they're enraged and deeply disappointed and may feel depressed because they aren't as powerful as they think they should deserve to be. So underneath, they're incredibly insecure. The boy I mentioned earlier who says, I don't know who I am, it's very scary to feel that way. It may be counterintuitive when you first meet a narcissist because they come across so charming, so entitled, so believing they're superior. But they're very insecure, actually, and are constantly wary of being put down. Instead, they disparage others. They may internally, at times, question very briefly if they're truly special and unique, and then I can't say how fast they dismiss these feelings. They're able to do that. That is their safety guard, so to speak. Another characteristic is that they are remarkably charming, and a doctor, let's say, or a lawyer, will think he's charming his staff, who's actually going berserk because they have work to do. And he doesn't recognize it. So when he comes out from an appointment, he overplays what he accomplished, and he makes his secretaries listen, and they're afraid not to because they want to keep their jobs, and they want to give the admiration they know the doctor wants. But meanwhile, they get behind on their work and end up staying late. So... it isn't really working, but the narcissist doesn't know that. They think that they're the successful leaders, which they often are, assertive but demanding, and often don't have as many followers as they expect they should have. They do a lot of networking and expect to be extremely popular and get deeply depressed when this doesn't happen. In keeping with this, they're very competitive. As I mentioned before, that you realized yourself that there are winners and losers. Others are opponents. It's all win, all lose. And if that doesn't happen, they may hold long-lasting grudges. They don't know how to reconcile with reality, so to speak. The young man I spoke of, at first, earlier in treatment, and he was in college, he blamed his peers who excluded him from very status-oriented societies that were at his college. And in order to kind of bear the fact that he was not chosen, and he lived to be chosen, he would gossip about them. Now, this was done vengefully, but of course it turned back against him.
Of course.
But he thought that, gee, if I tell so-and-so that this boy did something harmful to another person, then I'll get her on my side. But really, that person becomes afraid because they're afraid they'll be gossiped about.
Exactly.
So they end up just demeaning other people. And in the process, they find criticism pretty intolerable for themselves. Or I tend to soften it. it is intolerable to them. They're unable to cope when things don't go their way. They're hard-pressed to admit fault when they're wrong, very hard-pressed to admit fault when they're wrong. They can change a subject faster than you could ever believe it, and you don't even know it happened, so that they don't have to tolerate criticism, even if it's constructive. They hold the criticizer up as the person who made them the loser, rather than seeing that they did something wrong. And often, in response, they're what's called passive-aggressive, which is often seen as silent treatment. They will ignore someone for a long time, hours, days. And when narcissistic parents do this to kids, it's really very harmful. Another issue is that they're constantly on the go, so they don't feel boredom, because that's a scary experience for them. So like I said, they attend concerts, plays, expensive dinners, prestigious parties, because they don't want to be idle. And they expect their wives or partners to constantly attend all these activities. And they go on these grand vacations, and their partner can't relax. You're not allowed to sit in a hotel and watch TV for an hour. You have to be continuously on the go. There is no tourist site in the world that you miss. So they need total control. And often they do that with social media. So the doctor or the lawyer, even though he's as busy and as accomplished as he is, he's texting his wife all day long and expecting immediate text back, even if she's a professional and she's busy. They want to be responded to immediately. They want others to follow, so they can be the leaders. They expect others to drop what they're doing so they can respond to their constant context. It's their schedule that matters. As I said, they may do kind things, but it's not out of deep caring for others, but to be perceived that way. I can think of an example of a man his birthday was being celebrated. This was like really, really important. I mean, we love our birthdays to be celebrated. This was of utmost importance. And when he was at a gathering and somebody at the table started talking about something other than him, he literally got up out of the table and walked away. And the person who spoke, ironically, felt like he did something wrong, because most of us are pretty kind. And so he felt, gosh, that he got up and walked away, and it's his birthday. What did I do? Well, he didn't do anything. He just wasn't highlighting the importance of the special person that night. So they walk out on any crowd, give them the silent treatment if they're disappointed. And many guests go along with it, feel they shouldn't disappoint this self-acclaimed star, and, as I said, will berate themselves mercilessly if things don't go according to the narcissist's plan. So that I hope gives you a good, solid picture of this very confused person.
A very great foundation for sure. Thank you for that. And as you were talking, I mean, it sounds like there is a wide range of emotions, and of course everyone experiences them, but it just seems to the extreme. And is there a relationship between this boundless ambition with being very insecure and its relationship with the increasing rate of suicide today?
That's a very good question. I don't have a one-on-one an absolute answer to it. But when these people fall emotionally, they do fall very deeply. But when they're suffering like that, they do seek treatment, or their spouses insist on it. So I actually, in 40 years of work, I've never had a patient who committed suicide. So it's not an expertise, fortunately, for me. But I don't know if we can go to that extent to say that they're more suicidal than other potentially depressed people. I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, I'm asking one. I think a celebrity just had that happen or did that this past week, and usually at the end, most of us don't have any answers. And from the outside, we're like, "Wow, they had this boundless ambition. Everything looked great on the surface."
Yes.
And you don't, like you said, if they're so busy, you don't get to see where they're, down in the doldrums and very insecure.
Exactly. I mean, in that kind of situation, there's often a lot of drug use to help them sustain this exhilarated feeling if they aren't getting it from people enough. And that obviously starts to damage their brain, and they're not in reality anymore.
I was watching Bill Maher a week ago, and Katie Couric was on. And are you familiar with the show?
A little bit.
Okay. So she was on. It's a political show. So anyway, she's a blue blood in New York, and the leader of the first world is too. And she was kind of making a comment that, he always wanted to be a part. He couldn't play in the reindeer games. He was always the outcast, even though he was exhibiting all of these pathologies that you're highlighting, and people kind of just looked at it for what it was. So it's like, no matter what I accomplish, I still can't get into that inner circle.
Yeah, that's very disheartening. Is a really mild word. The person really suffers from that. But usually it's other people who want to get in his world. That's more likely.
Gotcha. Because it's when you were saying that the 20-year-old, it made it sound like, or the way I interpreted it was, there's this leadership group, right? And it's kind of that peer thing that you go through in school, and I'm always on the outside no matter what, and so I'm led to, like you were saying, backbiting or whatever to kind of give me a leg up, even though it backfires.
Exactly. That particular boy really did change, though, and that's the wonderful thing about youth. That they are more flexible. They are, if they feel that this is the treatment that I favor, which is to really help the person feel listened to and heard. And they really have not had that as they grew up. And if you do that consistently, in other words, don't contradict them, really listen, show them you're listening, let them feel heard, they start to trust you. And legitimately so, because I'm a trustworthy person and I'm really not judging them. I'm trying to help them. And they sense it. They know it. They see the genuine effort over months and sometimes years. And you become the only person they trust. But at least they have one person and they've learned about trust. So it's fascinating when that boy, I keep coming back to him because I cared so much about him, finished his treatment. I wish I could have recorded, not really, but his gratitude. That this narcissistic 20-year-old by 26 could say thank you. In his words, he said, what you did for me, and he used the word seismic. And he said he never really felt understood before. And, he grew up in a family with narcissistic parents, and he wasn't understood. He was almost used to make them feel grand. And he came to grips with reality. He had magnificent fantasies at the beginning of wanting to work in the White House, which he might someday. But he went to a very prestigious college, and there he discovered he was not, in fact, the smartest, because everybody was smart. And he tailored his ambitions to reality as he got older because he was in treatment. So he's not going to go to Harvard. In law school, which is what was his dream. He realized it's okay. He can go to NYU. I don't know where you're from, but, he can go to Ford. He can get a good education and feel confident in that. And that was just remarkable. It really was remarkable. So
I want to stay with him for a second. I want to stay with the 20-year-old for a second because it sounds like he broke the cycle, right?
Yeah.
And so what was the first step? Because I can only imagine one movie I used to like was Ricky Bobby, and Will Ferrell always said, if you're not first, you're last. And that was kind of the saying people said forever. And if his parents are narcissistic, right, or they exhibit that behavior, you're seen as a loser, or that's kind of you're fallible if you seek professional help. So what was it that made this child, buck that response that he was getting from his parents and still seek treatment?
Oh, actually, they wanted him to because they were overwhelmed with his rage.
Okay.
And they honestly didn't know how to cope. And they knew they didn't know how to cope. So it was not only for him that they wanted help. I hope that's what propelled them, but they wanted it for themselves. He was ruining their lives, and he was so difficult to be with. And that persisted all through high school. And so before me, he had multiple therapists who he didn't feel understood by, who probably didn't really get narcissism. And so it was like kind of failure after failure. So by the time he came to me, his parents really wanted, they were shocked. At the end, his mother sent me a note saying, I can't believe you took him out of the status-filled bubble. I didn't take her out of it, but I took him out of it. And but she picked it. She knew what that was about. So
sure.
So these parents do want their kids to have help. They do.
Well, let me ask the other side of it, and I want to get your opinion because of the scandal last year with parents paying for their kids to get into school, even if they didn't have the scholastic acumen, they were still getting in. So it's more of you need to be with the right people. You're smart. You're brilliant. What's your take on the percentage of those that go with the flow versus, you know what, I don't subscribe to this and I want out?
Yeah, there's a couple in my book who had great difference of opinion about that. The wife is a pediatrician, so she's very successful, but self-made. She grew up very poor. She paid for her huge education and was really good at her job. And her husband, as a neurosurgeon, thought his job was far more impressive than hers, and let anybody know that. And he was, really off base and very hurtful. But his kids, interestingly enough, grew up having this very entitled feeling. They were not good studiers. He was a hard worker, but he wasn't as brilliant as he thought. And the kids weren't brilliant. So they didn't succeed. They really didn't succeed in high school, and went to kind of low-level colleges, I guess you'd say. But, they went to college. But he would literally write their papers and do their homework in high school and in college. And when they got jobs, when they graduated, he would tutor them on the phone so they would stand out at work. Now, they really did. See, he believed this was okay because they really did learn from him. It was like having your own private tutor your whole life.
Right.
But the wife really objected. She could see the emotional consequences to her kids. And they warred about this endlessly. Whereas he felt my so-and-so wouldn't have been so achieving as whatever she did if I hadn't gotten her the contacts and told her how to relate to people, and not in a kind way, but in an effective way. And it worked. She was able to accomplish. So to him, he did a good thing. And in a sense, if he had done it more mildly, we do want parents to help kids with their homework. We do want parents to support their kids' abilities. But his was so extreme that he was taking control. And actually that doesn't raise your child's self-esteem. They feel totally dependent, and that's not a great way to grow up.
Sure. So we talked about the 20-year-old. Let's go to the 40-year-old. And this is a 1.5 question. So in the corporate environment, there's a lot of demands. And if you are part of that cream that rises to the top and you have boundless ambition, your time is pretty much taken. I mean, you're working like 16 hours a day. So but the other side of that 0.5 part of this question is corporate, at least in some environments, it's better or it's frowned upon if you're single doing that. So they really encourage that you're married. However, it seems like a conflict of interest if you have this allegiance to this corporation or your own business. You know, if you're a self-starter, how does this narcissist balance?
They don't. They really don't. I mean, the man I was saying who did all the homework for his kids forever, when they were young, he really ignored them because his ambitions were he was younger too, and he was very ambitious. And I remember having this conversation. He would come home and walk in the house talking on his cell phone, and his kids were little. And I said, how do you think they feel seeing Daddy, who they've missed all day, on the phone? And he said he didn't understand the question. You know, and I said, could you finish that phone call in the car and then put it away so that when you walk in, you can show your excitement in seeing them and hear about their day? And he thought I was just like from another planet. You know, he really didn't understand. And his wife, of course, sitting there shaking her head because she knew just what I meant.
Right.
So but see, this was a guy who did feel some remorse once he saw the kids failing in high school. It's just his way, and he realized he wasn't there for them when they were young. But his way of helping them was to feel superior to himself. So he didn't know how to do it. The corporate environment does encourage it, and these kids who come out of, this isn't in my book particularly, but let's say the kids who come out of Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania who are, you know, really learn business, and they go work for these very large investment corporations, they make so much money because they work double time. It's overwhelming. And a lot of them do cut out and do other things after a few years, because they realize they've chosen a life that excludes almost everything else. They're never having fun. Everything is status-oriented. And those kids are fortunate. They find themselves. And you don't see that in a 50-year-old because there's too much to lose, you know, at that point.
Right.
But I don't want to, you know, in today's environment, it's very tricky because we are vilifying people who are very wealthy, some of who are self-made, and we want to, you know, tax them so they can help pay the tuition of everyone else. And you know, I do believe in that, but these are people who are usually quite remarkable philanthropists. So if you look at somebody like Bill Gates, I mean, he does amazing things. And people may envy him and disparage him for being so wealthy, but he earned it. You know, so we have to kind of figure out where we stand on these things and not view everybody the same way, but really look at the individual.
Gotcha. And when you look at the individual, I think if I read between the lines, there's that disconnect with discipline. And the wealthy, as you're saying, on some respect, has a lot of discipline. And so there may be resentment to those that are not, and they don't empathize with them. They're like, look, look what I had to do to make where I am, and you didn't. So why are you penalizing me?
Yeah, they are hard workers. Most of these people. Some have grandiose visions, and they aren't hard workers, and they don't succeed. But many really do, and they really do work hard all the time, but at a sacrifice to intimate relationships. because they're not available.
So when we did a wide jump from 20 to 40, but those are usually the dating years. So can you identify someone, as you were mentioning, these people are already married and the spouse may, like you said, they've been in it for years dealing with this person. What are some things that a person that's in the 20 to 40-year-old dating realm, what are some triggers or some just different characteristics that they can keep an eye out for to see, this person may be going in this direction?
Okay. What I'll do is I'll focus on the women who fall for narcissistic men and have 20, 30, 40-year relationships with them. Such a woman is often called codependent, meaning she needs to be attached to a man she admires. So when they meet, he woos her, he pursues her, he says, break that date and come out with me. And she does, because she feels so special. And this is what she is making her self-worth out of. So she often is incorrectly self-deprecating, underestimating her own abilities, and following this man's dictates without questioning it. So she minimizes or dismisses her own needs. They're certainly very capable women. I said one was a pediatrician, another was a homemaker, but a wonderful mother. She too easily accepted her husband's domination, his verbose talking about himself, his need to take charge of all their activities. She tolerated his silent treatment when his needs weren't met. She saw this as what marriage was. So she may have had narcissistic parents, so she was accustomed to this and didn't realize there really was another world out there. She could be a really nice person, very socially agreeable, and make friends easily, but he would view her friends as commonplace. They're just regular people. But his friends would come first and were elevated. She is likely to want to stay with him because if she can't build her own self-esteem, which is why these women often come into treatment, because when they're in their 40s, and they know a part of them knows they're very capable, they don't feel it. And they get depressed or very anxious, and they are suffering, so they seek help. And then the job of the therapist is really to help them find and appreciate their own abilities, their own gifts, and by not only supporting it, but even identifying it, these women then come to feel disenchanted with the man who's disparaging them because they realize they are worthwhile people too. And that's when the marriage gets lost. And in the extreme, that's when they may discover that the narcissist they've been living with has been having an affair or many affairs, and they were totally blind to it. They just accepted he was out working all the time and are shocked when it's revealed. And that upends everybody's life. He still wants to feel special and grand. He just wants her to accept it. He says he'll stop. Some do, some don't. And some women can kind of take on a good belief in themselves and expand their lives, their friendships, their accomplishments, and feel like individuals.
Gotcha.
They may or may not stay in the marriage. It depends on how invested they are, particularly in their children's lives at that point and their way of life. But they're seeing themselves differently. They go through quite a tremendous struggle and change.
And that actually led me to the next question, because what we're talking about is the traditional marriage, right? The nuclear family, if you will. The June Cleaver and Ward goes off to work and she kisses him on the cheek, to conquer the world. However, in 2020, with this boundless ambition and what have you, and these highly demanding corporate jobs, you have women in these roles. And
Yeah.
so are they choosing not, if they're exhibiting this NPD, are they choosing not to be in a marriage because they're like, why would I marry a guy in a less station than I am?
That is what? I'm sorry?
That is in a less station of life, like socially.
Oh. Well, they begin to question what they've done because their ambitions are being fulfilled too. They no longer rely on the man to make them feel great. They get their own praise and their own admiration. If the man can learn to be flexible, they're a great pair. They're a really winning team. But if she feels really underappreciated, she's going to look for someone who will see her as she is. So she will leave. But divorce is such a difficult process that some people do stay in the marriage. And some marital therapists, I'm not one, but some try to believe that the marriage should stay together, that the woman should forgive the man for his transgression. And, of course, this is a whole national issue.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the other side of that, I was just thinking how at the beginning of the top of the hour, we're talking about the corporate environment rewarding that behavior. And I've seen where, especially for women, that if they, tie the line to the corporate excellence, they're rewarded. But if if they're pregnant or something like that, they not necessarily get demoted, but they get off that fast track. So it seems like the corporate environment doesn't allow for that balance either. Like you can't be the top earner and a housewife. Yeah.
Or they try to do the impossible. I was writing for Huffington Post for quite a while, and I did a series of interviews online with professional women and asked them about various questions. And interesting, they were all very successful. Dentists, gynecologists, lawyers, high earners. They all had kids. Some made more money than their husbands, highly educated. But, the bottom line, they said they cared mostly about being mothers. And that didn't keep them from doing their occupations, but they kept their minds on motherhood. And they had to figure out how to do both. And they did. I kind of fit into that category. I have wonderful children, and I love being a grandmother, and I prioritize it. And so that was my way of kind of dealing with this issue. But some women exceed their human limitations and fall apart. You can't. It's very hard to be the perfect mother, the perfect corporate person all at the same time. You end up sleeping 3 hours a night so that you can get up early and do your work and then be there to make breakfast for your child going off to school. So you can't, you just can't live like that. Arianna Huffington, in fact, wrote a book, I forget the name of it, but she apparently had an exhaustion breakdown. She ended up in the hospital because she was trying to do all that. So, I look out for the young women that I meet to help them find what do you really want to prioritize at what time in your life. We don't have to do the same thing at 20 that we do at 40, that we do at 60. We can change our careers. We can change our priorities. And that helps a lot of women to learn and see other women do that.
That was my next question as far as group therapy. Do you handle that as well? Like, it sounds like a lot of these groups hang out together, and if that one person was courageous to take that first step, they may bring the whole group with them.
Yeah. You need new mentors. Women seem to find them. I've kind of shifted gears from writing nonfiction to fiction lately, and so I've begun writing novels, and they're really character studies. They have, I hope, good plots, and they're suspenseful. But they show, it gives me an opportunity to create characters who learn how to change and how to see clearly their lives and know they have many opportunities. It's not real life, it's fiction, but I'm enjoying writing about it.
Sure, and I guess the last question, in real life, I mean, you're balancing all that. You have a successful practice, but you're also, like you said, a mother and a grandmother, but you're also an accomplished artist. So how do you juggle all of these?
The way I did it was when my kids were little and I was practicing, I organized my practice around their needs because I personally did not want to miss out. I wanted to be there after school. So I did not have a 3 o'clock appointment. And when they were in high school, I would drive my kids to school before they had licenses because I wanted to spend time with them. And then I'd come home and go to my office. So you kind of find your own ways of doing everything with being careful that you don't get overwhelmed, because that's too easy. And I had a very supportive husband, so I also have an office in my house. I have a studio, an art studio at my home that my husband actually built for me, so that logistically I'm not on the road commuting everywhere, and that helps me personally to put everything together.
No, that's phenomenal, and so when others want to, I mean, it sounds like you have laid out a template that it can actually work. You can be highly ambitious and balanced and live a successful life. And for those that are running to or identifying narcissists in their relationships, guys or girls, how would they get in touch with you, and how can they, I'd like for you to highlight your books and your website and all that good stuff.
Okay. The newest book, which is coming out earlier than I expected, you mentioned, is coming out March 17th, so it's already on Amazon. How do you live with a narcissist? And that book has many, many examples of situations that I think are helpful for men and women to read. There's a section for women not telling them, but advising them on ways to take actions to feel more self-confident themselves. There's a section that talks about how not to raise a narcissist. And I hope that book really is appealing to people and clarifies the characteristics that we talked about. My website is very simple. It's Laurie, Laurie, Hollman, Hollman, Ph.D.com. And if you go on it, all the books are there, and over 100 articles on all different parenting and personality disorder topics, so that people can read them without buying anything. There are links to everything. And I hope people do that or subscribe to my blog, which I'm not using as a marketing tool, but really just to put articles out there that I want. Then you get the article in your email. It's easy. And when people use my website well, it's a big support for them. And that's really my intention. I love writing. I'm doing it more and more. I do it almost every day now. But the reason I've been kind of encouraged to do that is so that what people have learned in my practice, they can also learn by reading on their own. And it's actually the publisher who suggested I write the series for parents, the Busy Parents series, because most families today have two working parents. And how do they manage to use what I call parental intelligence? That's the concept I created, when they're very busy. And so I show them how they can do that. So they have a kind of template, like you use that as a good word, to know about how to look at their child, not as bad, but the stress, and understand the meaning behind their behavior. And I teach them how to do that. So all these books are, they're not fluffy self-help books. They do take time, but they really do educate, and that's my aim.
And it sounds like you definitely are doing that, and you have just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza and Dr. Laurie Hollman. It was a pleasure. Let's stay in touch.
Oh, yes, I'd love to. I really like your website and your focus. And also, I should mention, an easy way to find my books is just to go to Amazon. They're all there. Just, put my name in the search box, and they'll all be listed. And Amazon asks you to write a whole biography, so all that stuff is there, too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. You're a wonderful listener yourself, actually.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.